behalf of the marketing team at School Health. I'd like to thank you for joining us today and participating in Matthew's story, Why Preparation Matters. Joining us today is SCA advocate and ZOLL's marketing specialist for public safety, Matt Mangine. He will share how his son's sudden cardiac arrest showed that AEDs alone aren't enough, and why both training and a clear emergency action plan are essential for rapid and confident response. Before we begin, I have a few things I would like to review about today's webinar. We will not be taking audio questions, but you can submit your questions via the questions interface tab in GoToWebinar. You can submit your questions anytime during the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and a link to it will be sent to all those registered after the webinar, along with a certificate of attendance for joining us. If you are having technical difficulties with the audio or visual portion of today's webinar, please call GoToWebinar directly at 855-352-9003. And with that, Matt, I will turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today and this afternoon. So I'm here to talk about my son, Matthew. It's always hard to start this. It's hard to bring this up. Why do I do it? I do it because what happened to us, no family should ever have to endure. We have the tools and the knowledge here to make this a bigger difference than it is today. So I kind of want to start a little bit at the beginning. Matthew was born October 13th of 2003 to two, as I would say, adult immature parents. My wife, Kim, and I were high school sweethearts. We were the first of our friends to have kids at a relatively young age in this day and age at 25. So Matthew grew up in what I call a immature adult environment where we were still figuring out how to be an adult, but we had a child. He was a great kid. He loved outdoors. He was a Cub Scout. He was a Boy Scout. He played every sport that he could. One of the great stories is when we moved into our house, he was about 10 years old, and we pulled up to the house, and as the moving truck was pulling up behind us, he looked at us and said, "All right, I'm going to go out and make friends. I'll see you at dark." And he hopped out of the car and he was gone for the day. And, from that day on, he had friends all throughout the neighborhood, and he was that boy that got up early and was gone from dawn to dusk. So, again, he was a great kid. He was personable with everybody. And then on June 16th of 2020, let me go back even a little further. Again, he loved to play sports. He was playing youth football from about fourth grade on. And the only way he convinced me if he could play youth football is if I coached, because I was worried about, the safety and everything that was involved with that. And he and our neighbor's friend, who was the coach, talked me into, if you coach, will you let him play? And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll coach. I really didn't want to. I just like being a parent. And, that's when I really, again, you're watching your kid out there playing a sport, getting hit, and it really stressed me out. And I begged for about 3 or 4 years. And I finally convinced him, football, to go to soccer. And that's how he ended up being so passionate about soccer. He decided to step away from football in the 6th grade. And that's when he joined a club soccer team. And from then the rest is history. And he loved the game of soccer. So fast forward to June 16th of 2020, he was at soccer practice with my wife, Kim, and they were doing their first night of practice from COVID. And on his last sprint, as he was coming back, he collapsed of a sudden cardiac arrest. So I set a timer there, and I just want to pause for a second. That was 3 minutes from the time that I started talking. And you're going to hear 3 minutes a lot today when I speak. If you can get CPR started and an AED onto a person that collapses of sudden cardiac arrest, their chances of survival increase to 90%. Okay. And I kind of had my pause there right when I was getting to his story. So on June 16th, Matthew collapsed. I got a frantic phone call from my wife, Kim, who was there. And the one thing that I heard from the beginning was, he's having a seizure. He's having a seizure. No one knows what to do. And again, I didn't know what was going on. It was a very chaotic scene over the phone. And the first thing I did was drop what I was doing, yelled into the house for Joseph to come on. We loaded into the car and started driving as fast as we could to the hospital. Joseph and I beat the ambulance by a few minutes to the hospital. As it was pulling up, we were getting out of our car, and I sent him into the emergency room's waiting room, and I met the ambulance with Matthew to go into the trauma room. And I kind of did that to keep Joseph from seeing the scene that I was seeing, which was Matthew being pulled out with a lot of equipment connected to him, going into the emergency room bay doors. I remember a nurse came up to me and said, you can't be here. And I said, well, that's my son. I'm going wherever he goes. So I followed the team into the trauma room. And as we entered the trauma room, I again live in a smallish town. I knew the physician that was going to be working on him. I knew some of the other staff that was there, and it just kind of hit me as he looked at me across the room. It hit me that this wasn't a good situation. They proceeded to work on Matthew for about 20 minutes, and I remember just sitting in the back of this room as they're working on my son. And to be honest with you, I felt like I was in a scene from ER or any of those, medical related trauma TV shows. It just felt very surreal. And I just kept thinking in the back of my head, no parent should have to bury a child. Come on, you can do, how do we bring him back? After about 20 minutes, the inevitable that I knew was coming, the physician stopped and turned to me and said, we're very sorry, but there's nothing more we can do for your son. And it just, again, this is surreal. I don't even feel it. It was a truly out of body experience because I didn't feel like this was really happening. And I had to go tell my wife, who they had in another room by herself. And I walked in to tell her, and I knew that, this was going to be the hardest thing that I ever had to tell her. And when I told her, I knew she was going to really break down because, it'd been 20, 30 minutes since we had last talked on the phone. When we got to the hospital, she was extremely upset, not in the right state of mind. And when I delivered the news, she obviously, she collapsed into my arms. And I kept thinking, I got to be the strong one today because this is the hardest thing we've ever gone through in our lives. So after Kim and I got squared away and we started, talking to the hospital staff about plans, again, you're not mentally prepared for any of these conversations. I got a text from my father that he and my stepmother had just arrived. My stepmother was going to stay with Joseph. He wanted to come back. So I went out to get him. And the first thing he said to me as I walked out, he said, where was the AED? And that was the first time that I started to things started to click with me that something wasn't right and something just didn't feel right about this entire situation. So I went out, I talked to Joseph, I talked to my stepmother, and I remember when I kind of bent down to tell Joseph, again, I'm not in the right state of mind. I'm not really there. I just am in such shock. I didn't know what to say to my 11-year-old son, and I just say, your brother's dead. And it was one of those things that as soon as it came out, I'm like, why can't I wish I could take it back. And I don't even think he was grasping what was going on. So after that point, now we're trying to make decisions. We're trying to get the last rites, for him. We're trying to find a priest. The coroner is meeting with us, and we found out, he wanted to be an organ and tissue donor. So we had to approve, that. And again, these are all things that parents shouldn't do. And I remember as we're talking to the coroner and we're sitting in this room, my phone starts blowing up with my golf friends' texts, joking around about something. And I'm thinking, one, why is my phone buzzing? And I look down and I see this stream of text. And how do you deliver to your friends like something awful's happened? And I think I typed out the same thing that I said to Joseph. I said, Matt, there was an incident tonight. Matthew has passed away, and left it at that. And it went silent, obviously, after that. But, again, there is no playbook for what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do this. We headed home and just started to figure out what we were going to do. And I remember when we got home, I walked up to Matthew's room and I turned the light on and shut the door. I didn't know what else to do, right? It was just, again, a very surreal moment, but I still had this feeling in the back of my mind. Something wasn't right about that night. I went back downstairs to talk to Kim, and I said, you were there, you witnessed this thing. This is going to be the hardest thing I ever asked you to do, but we need to go into my office and sit down, and I need you to write down everything you remember, because it's never going to be fresher than right now, because I want to understand what happened and how we ended up in this position. So Kim started to talk about, what had happened, and we're taking notes and writing everything down so it was still fresh. As you can see on this slide, this is a diagram of the school. You can see where Matthew went down. There were 5 AEDs on campus. When Matthew went down, as I go back and I talk about, what I heard over the phone was, this is a seizure, this is a seizure. I didn't know what I know about sudden cardiac arrest today, but they didn't know what to do. So one of the coaches decided to send a parent to go find, as you can see, the 2 AEDs on the far end by the baseball field. That is the one that's there mounted permanently, and the other one was the athletic trainer. So the coach sent a parent over to get the athletic trainer. By the time he walked past all the other AEDs to get to the athletic trainer, and they made it back to the field, EMTs were there. I go back to 3 minutes. This was roughly 12 minutes after Matthew had collapsed. He didn't receive his first shock until about 12 to 13 minutes from EMS after his collapse. Again, time is of the essence in situations like this. So as we started to learn, as we were looking into the incidents that happened that night, that's when I started to learn. Training is the key to this. I spoke at an event once, and I used the analogy, Mike Tyson. Everybody in boxing, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. It's how much you prepare for your plan to know when it gets blown up. How are you going to pick yourself up off the mat and perform and still get through that fight? That's what going through an emergency is the minute that something happens, how well you've trained and prepared for it shows how much you're ready for that emergency. Again, 5 AEDs were on site, and time was of the essence, 3 minutes for the AED to be applied. So I kind of mentioned my father before when he walked in the door that night, but there's a family connection to this. And the reason why I go back to the beginning of when I coached Matthew when he played football, why I was so nervous and why I understood all of the things beyond just playing sports that made me nervous about a sport like football, or even soccer has, high incidence of injury rates and concussions also. But my father was, at the time that Matthew had passed away, was the associate athletic director of sports medicine at the University of Cincinnati. He's been there for over 25 years. He is now just the head basketball athletic trainer. So I grew up around athletic training my entire life. He was my athletic trainer growing up. Every time Matthew had a problem, it was kind of nice to have that family connection where I just ran him over to my father's house and had him take a look at him and make sure that everything was okay. But knowing all the things that I knew, I remember sitting in my office as he and I are planning the funeral, and I looked at him and I said, how does this happen to us? Everything we knew, we tried to, even instill Matthew, hydration, being ready, talking about having your body in the right places. I said, how does this happen to us, and why our family? It also felt so weird that it happened to our family. And he just said, there's always a plan, and I don't know why. But again, that also that day was kind of the start of the thoughts of how do I want to become an advocate and use our story for future and good. That's how I got into the advocacy side of this. Down, and again, I was surrounded by a lot of great people, family and friends that knew a lot about this subject. And I said, what do we need to do? How do we make a difference? We want to start a foundation in his honor. So March 2021, less than a year after Matthew's collapse, we decided to start the Matthew Mangine Jr. One Shot Foundation. And when we started the foundation, we said, well, we want to start a foundation, but we didn't know what to do. We didn't know, we wanted to donate AEDs, obviously. There's a lot of organizations out there, but in all reality, AEDs weren't the issue. There's a bigger piece of this at play. And the bigger piece is advocating for education and preparedness. And that's where we started to ask questions. How can we make a difference in that? Using my background, I used my connections with my father. I got introduced to the director of emergency medicine at the University of Cincinnati. They showed us a program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. It's called Take 10. And again, we started working with UC. We started working with a lot of the area schools, and it just snowballed into a lot of positive things. When you look at what the survival rate is in the United States of only 10%, that is just abysmal. And honestly, parents need to be asking the right questions when they're dropping their kids off at high school or youth sports events. ESPN did a story on us. They started filming the summer of 2022, and they spent a lot of time here in interviewing us and kind of telling our story. And when they approached us about doing it, I thought, this is great. I want parents to be able to see it. This is a link to the story. Anyone that kind of wants to hear our story without me being there, this is great to show to people. A lot of the stuff that comes in for the foundation kind of comes in through this being shown at like athletic directors events, school, big meetings. I get a lot of athletic trainers that send this to me every year, and they say that they show this to their high school classes every year as part of athletic training services. Another piece that came out on us is Safer Sidelines. Safer Sidelines was done at the Louisville Courier-Journal with a reporter by the name of Stephanie Kuzidum. She has made it her life's mission as a journalist to report and educate people on sports safety. And she has her own database around youth athlete deaths. And she did this all on her own through news reports. We have a group chat going of other parents that have either lost children or have survivor children. And we kind of let her know every time we hear of a story so that she can add to this list. This is not anything, no reporting. This is all word of mouth of how she's created her list and has done a lot of great work in this. If you get a chance, please look into Safer Sidelines. It's a wonderful piece for parents to educate themselves on. So let's talk about sudden cardiac arrest a little bit. And I'll admit, even though growing up in an athletic training environment, I didn't realize that cardiac arrest was the #1 cause of death in youth sports. I think the first time I ever had any area of exposure to cardiac arrest, I still remember I was coaching high school football. I was still in college, so it was in my early 20s, and we were playing in a football game down in Pikeville, Kentucky. At the end of the game, we're walking to the training room, and one of the grandparents went down, and he had a cardiac arrest right there on the side of the field. This is in the late 90s. And one of the team physicians was actually a cardiothoracic surgeon, so he knew exactly what to do. There was an ambulance on staff, and I kind of wasn't right there, but I got to see kind of that quick action and emergency action. Unfortunately, that person didn't make it, but that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that happen in my life. And again, this was in a controlled game environment. 350,000 people suffer out of hospital cardiac arrests annually in the United States. It's the #1 natural cause of death in the United States. 90% of victims don't survive, but survival rates, as I discussed before, jump to 90% when they're used within 3 minutes. If you take anything away from this, and I'm still going to say it a few more times, 3 minutes. You have to be prepared to act within 3 minutes. AEDs are most needed in public spaces, sports fields, community centers, workplaces, schools. That's where these happen. And we need them to be recognizable, like you can see on the screen, where it's mounted to a wall, not in a closet so that no one knows it's there. I go back to the 90%. The 10% survival rate currently in cardiac arrests. If you look back before AEDs kind of became widely accessible, it was still 10%, right? So the issue isn't necessarily AEDs, it's bystander people jumping in to put the AED on and to start CPR right away. Imagine if every person that suffered a cardiac arrest had an AED applied and had CPR done to them, we would see survival rates explode. SCA doesn't discriminate. It affects athletes, parents, teachers, colleagues, people you know and love. I've gotten to meet a lot of survivors over the years. My son was 16 years old. I now have group chats and I've met a lot of parents throughout the country that have lost their children. Our story is not unique. You can take our story and put it to any of those other children that passed away on athletic fields, and the story is almost identical to matching up to the same as ours. Their child collapsed, delay in getting CPR and an AED on, didn't receive a shock until it was entirely too late or none at all, and they didn't survive. The story is the same on stories like ours that we suffered a loss. When you hear a story of a survivor, it is completely different. And in that 3 minutes, people acted and people helped, and that's why that person is here today. Communities want to act. 90% of Americans who say they want a bystander to use an AED on them to save their life. Now, when I first read this statistic, I was like, wow, 90%? Why is it not 100%? But I think there were certain people that didn't necessarily understand that question. But obviously, everyone that's on this call today, if they collapse, they're going to want somebody to do what they can to save their life. I would say there's not many people that don't. 3 minutes, there's that number again. That's the window. If you start CPR and get that AED on within that time frame, those chances of survival increase to 90%. 45% of Americans would be more confident using an AED if it provided real-time coaching and feedback, including verbal and visual instructions. No one needs to be taught how to use an AED. The minute that you turn the AED on, it will tell you exactly what to do start to finish. People should not be afraid of AEDs. They should realize the faster they get the AED, they will remember all the training that they've had and it'll kick in faster. So now we're going to get into youth sports. And again, this is something that is near and dear to my heart. Being a youth sports coach, growing up with 2 young kids that played youth sports. Youth sports is the wild, wild west in a lot of states. And here's some statistics that blow my mind. 50% of parents believe all youth sports teams have access to a team AED, yet most U.S. states still do not specifically mandate teams to have one. You heard me chuckle there a little bit. It's 100% accurate. Most parents assume that teams have an AED when they don't. And if parents don't ask these questions, they don't know the true answer to these. 50% of parents think all youth coaches are required to have CPR and AED knowledge. Not even every state in the United States requires high school coaches to have CPR and AED training. I know the states that I live in Kentucky does, but not every state does for even high school coaches. When it comes to youth sports, I said it at the beginning, it's the wild, wild west. It's really up to the individualized sports and the coaches to make those decisions to be trained. There's not many laws requiring it. Again, don't assume that your child is in an environment that meets all these requirements. You need to ask these questions. 53% of parents don't know whether their child's sports practice meet or game facility are equipped with AEDs. Again, I see these numbers. People just assume if you're not asking the right questions, then your child might be in an uncomfortable situation for you. And what happens if they suffer a cardiac arrest or a medical emergency and no one is prepared? So this brings me to emergency action plans. This is Evelyn Tandy. She's become a very close friend over the years. She's an athletic trainer at St. Xavier High School down in Louisville, Kentucky. She created this on her own. This is a wall piece that is mounted to the wall by every AED and at the entrance of every venue that they have on St. X's campus. She created the EAP so that it's scannable, that any person walking around can scan that QR code and know and have the EAP on their phone. Because if everyone doesn't know what all the steps are that are included in the emergency action plan, there's going to be gaps in that. And as we talk about emergency action plans, they need to be practiced by the staff. In the state of Kentucky, we changed the rules to where, or to the laws to where it is now before the start of every season. Annually isn't sufficient enough. We need for coaches and administration to be practicing this right before the start of a season so that it is fresh on their mind. Emergency, again, I go back to Mike Tyson, right? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. If you practice this plan all the time, you're going to revert to how you practiced it so that it's just like going through the motions. If you want to see a perfect emergency action plan put into place, go back to January 2nd, 2023, and we all saw it on Monday Night Football on national TV. And let's face it, that football game changed the conversation nationally around sudden cardiac arrest. And it's really helped all of us gain a bigger voice and given parents a better foot to stand on to show that they need their children in a safe environment to participate in sports and education. So Take 10 training was shown to us by the University of Cincinnati emergency medicine team. The same emergency medicine team that was on the field at Paycor Stadium when Damar Hamlin's collapse happened and helped in his rescue. So this is something that we started 2 years before Damar's collapse. Take 10 training was shown to the University of Cincinnati by Austin, Texas. It was designed as a education piece to teach people hands-only CPR in 10 minutes so that people could be accustomed to doing CPR without going through the long certification class and just know quickly how to do CPR. It's a train the trainer model. I was speaking to a group of athletic trainers on this one time, and they came to me and they said, wow, this is kind of like the Amway of CPR training. And I laughed and I said, that's a really good way to put it. But, I train people to teach this and then we try to donate as a foundation the training bags, which cost around $1,200 and include 20 mannequins and an AED trainer to that school. Using that equipment bag, you can train up to 40 athletes and coaches at a time so that they can all learn how to do CPR, because you never know when that person is going to be, any person is going to be put in the situation where they're going to need to know CPR. So we started this as a pilot program at Taylor High School in Cleves, Ohio, and the athletic director and athletic trainers there bought in 100%. And we started doing all the coaches. After the first coaches training, Larry Hergis and the two athletic trainers came to me and said, hey, what about doing all the athletes? We want to teach all these athletes how to do this. So they took it upon themselves that they developed a program that we now ask people to do with the foundation. They bring every athlete in the first week of practice, and they go through this 10 minutes of hands-only CPR with all the students. And it's teaching a life skill. We all grew up and we know stop, drop, and roll. We know fire drills, and we know how to handle that from our training in school. Imagine if we taught our kids not just fire drills, we taught them CPR training. Because we haven't lost a student on school campus since 1957 in Chicago to a school fire, but we lose, on average, over 2,000 students a year to a cardiac arrest. Why are we not teaching our children about cardiac arrest right now? We would, again, I go back to see survival rates skyrocket. So the training bags are probably the number one thing that our foundation donates. We do donate AEDs also. As you can see, it's around the same cost of an AED, a little bit less, but we would much rather donate one of these training bags and get everybody on campus prepared to make sure they're ready for a cardiac event. Over on the right-hand side of this, you can see three individuals in that picture. The gentleman in the center is a longtime family friend, Mike Quinn. He is an athletic trainer by trade, and his daughters played at Fusion FC Soccer Club. And they had come to us about, working with the foundation, doing the training, putting AEDs in. We met with them. I kind of laid out an entire plan of how we could implement training, emergency action plans, all the things that they needed to do. And, it's one of those things. Unless you find that one person that wants to drive it, it's very hard to get it implemented. So Mike ended up being that person at the soccer club. He brought all the coaches in over 2 weekends and did hands only take 10 CPR training with all the coaches for the entire program. 2 weeks after their last session, he dropped his daughter off at soccer practice, and the two individuals there are her coaches. He worked them out, stretched the team out, kind of as the pseudo athletic trainer for his daughter's team, and got them warmed up for practice. And then he went to go on a run. As he left to go on a run, he made it about to the far end of the field, 100 yards away. And as he tells the story, he doesn't remember pretty much from the time he started his run onward until he woke up in intensive care at the hospital. But when Mike got to the far end of the field, he collapsed of a sudden cardiac arrest. And luckily, a father and son were walking their dog, and they witnessed his collapse and started yelling over to the two coaches that he had gone down. The two coaches rushed to his side, started CPR right away, called 911. The ambulance was there within 4 minutes and delivered a shock that brought Mike back to his heart back in a normal rhythm. And he ended up being rushed to the hospital, had a stent put in, and is here today to tell that story. There's great articles. You can see that Stephanie Cousineau from the Louisville Courier-Journal did a great article on this. I love to tell this story because it's really the first connection that we had as a foundation. So this is something else that I like to show to every coach that we're doing CPR training. Older high school students, I like to show it to. It's very intense to watch, but it is how to recognize a sudden cardiac arrest in athletes. And it was done by Dr. Dresner out of the University of Washington. In the state of Kentucky now, every coach, as part of their recertification process, has to watch this video. Why is it important? It shows us the signs and symptoms of sudden cardiac arrest. I go back to the beginning. What did my wife say to me over the phone? He's having a seizure. That is one of the classic symptoms of a cardiac arrest. And if you recognize that it's not a seizure and start CPR and get that AED right away, within that first 3 minutes, we're going to have a lot of different outcomes. So I do implore everyone to watch this. And if there's any takeaways from this, get 10 people that have no idea about sudden cardiac arrest to watch this video if they get a chance, and potentially to watch the ESPN video. So I love to show this slide because Claire's cardiac arrest and rescue is a classic rescue of that 3-minute time period. As you can see over on the right-hand side, Claire collapsed, call 911 happened at 8 seconds. All the way down to at 3 minutes and 23 seconds, Claire was back and talking to her rescuers even before the ambulance arrived. This was a perfect, I have watched this video once. It's very hard to watch, but when you see it, it is wonderful to see an emergency action plan implemented and run all the way through. Kim and I had the honor of presenting with Dr. Dresner, and he showed this video right before Kim and I got up. And if you've ever get a chance to meet my wife, she gets very nervous of public speaking. So she was very nervous before we were going up on stage. And I always say that there are signs around us to show that, Matthew's always watching over us. And it was the first time when I saw the time frame over on the side that I saw the date up in the corner. But Claire's arrest actually happened on Matthew's birthday. So that's another reason why I love to show Claire's rescue and how important it is and the tie that it has to our story. We are all advocates. Share our story. I'm at ZOLL Medical now, and when I presented this to our entire sales team, I said, I need to see a raise of hands of how many of your friends have AEDs, because this is what we sell. If we sell to anybody, we should make sure that all of our friends know why AED is important. Not many people raise their hands. And when I talk to a group of people, the goal is touch 10 people if you hear me speak today and talk to them about cardiac arrest. Because out of all causes of death, it's the highest percentage chance of somebody coming upon that. Everyone needs to be aware of it. Imagine if every person in the United States, because they were trained in a school growing up, knew how to do CPR and what an AED was. Again, 10% is the survival rate now. If every person started today learning how to do CPR and everyone in the United States understood basic CPR and AEDs, you would see that 10% explode to a way higher number. No one tells me no to my face. I would love to join a meeting if you need me as backup. It's very hard to hear our story for school administrators and not to implement some of the things that we want to do. It's awesome to walk into a school for the first time that reach out to us and they're already doing some phase of it. And we end up finding just little pieces that they need to figure out. I always hear, it's hard to train everybody in CPR because it's so expensive. I go back to anyone can teach CPR in a scholastic environment to students that's just basic CPR with minimal amount of equipment. Reach out to our foundation and we can help you do that. You need to find the champion in every setting. Sometimes it's not the school administration. Sometimes, as I like to call it, that passionate parent. That passionate parent's voice can bring about change when they wear administrative out and down. I'm a passionate parent now. Joseph is always in a safe environment because, again, when I walk in the door, most people know our story and they're prepared for it. This is how I've turned my passion into a purpose. I love what I do now. Is it hard to talk about Matthew's story? 100%. This is what I love to talk about. I love to beat it into people's minds that knowing how to use an AED is simple. AEDs were designed with a 9-year-old with no prior training in mind to simply turn it on and use this. I have friends that I purchased AEDs and they said, okay, now can you train me on it? I said, not a problem. Put the battery in, plug the pads in, see the power button, go ahead and push that. Doesn't matter the make or model. And it starts to tell you, I said, you're trained. That's all you need to know is how to hit the power button. I've gotten a chance to work on a lot of legislative work. I had the opportunity to speak at the press conference with Damar Hamlin in Washington, D.C. on the AED Act. And, that is passed. I've worked on legislation both in Kentucky and Ohio because I live in greater Cincinnati. So I get to play, we live very close to Ohio and in Kentucky. We changed the laws. The EAP law is strengthened in the state of Kentucky. Right now, every coach has to simulate their emergency action plan before the start of every season. Ohio has changed their emergency action plan laws and now has mandated that AEDs are mandatory on school campuses. They are also in Kentucky. So other states are following, and we have a huge job to do. There are still many states out there that do not. And I love to work with those other organizations to lend our voice because as a collective, we need to bring this up to make true change. It can't be just one person. Our program with the foundation, we've trained well over 20,000 high school students, coaches, and administrators in the greater Cincinnati area. The furthest away that we've worked with any individual was at BYU. I had a medical student reach out to me, saw our story. I don't remember how off the top of my head, but he reached out and said, I want to do this work. I sent him a training bag, and he sends me his numbers once a quarter, and he's still training people out at BYU on a regular basis. So we don't just work in greater Cincinnati. I started at ZOLL Medical May of this past year. I've been here a few months now. I love it. I was in medical sales for over 20 years, and I wanted to get back into medical sales where in a position and for a company that I knew I can make a difference in something that I was passionate about. And Kim doesn't like to bring this up, but she also told me I wasn't detail oriented enough to run a foundation. So she told me to go find a real job. And that's another reason why I ended up at ZOLL is she begged my boss now to give me a position to get me out of her hair at the foundation. Joseph's our younger son. He's a golfer. He did soccer for years, and he got the golf bug, and it's awesome. I love to follow him around a golf course. The most disheartening thing is I have not beaten my son since he was 14 years old. I used to be halfway decent at golf now, and it would be a pipe dream for me to ever beat my child again. But I also bring it up because Joseph, golf and cross country are two of the sports that probably give me the most angst. We're in the middle of nowhere. Where are the closest AEDs? Sometimes, like using golf for an example, there might be one in the pro shop. Imagine when you're halfway through the front or back nine and you're the furthest point away from the pro shop as possible. How can you get that AED out there within those first 3 minutes? Kim and I obviously have carried an AED since the day that Matthew passed on our person. Anytime Joseph's doing athletic activities, Kim came up with a really cool idea for our backpack that it has AED inside on the back. It's created a lot of conversations around the golf course, and a lot of other parents now carry their own AEDs while their children are playing golf because they realize it's a big miss when we're out on a huge piece of property like that to have AEDs around. I brought up, our foundation is the Matthew Mangine Jr. One Shot Foundation. One Shot was something between me and Matthew. When we created the foundation, they came to me and said, "Hey, we need a tagline." And I kind of chuckled and I said, "I've got one, but everybody's going to think it's stupid because I think it's kind of goofy." And they said, "What is it?" And I said, "One Shot." And they said, "That's awesome." And if they truly knew that I semi-stole it from Eminem and might have even used some of the lyrics with Matthew to say, you only have one shot, decisions that you make can have lifelong implications, and to make sure that you're making the right decisions in life. But that was something between me and Matthew. But we've recently shortened it because the Matthew Mangine Jr. One Shot Foundation was really long. So if you get a chance, please go to our website, oneshot.life. And I finished a few minutes early so that I can answer any questions. Please be nice to me. It's very hard to tell Matthew's story, and it's mentally draining. It truly is. And it's going to take me a couple hours after this to finish up, but I'm open for any questions that you may have.
Thanks for sharing your story, Matt. This was all really valuable information. Before we take questions, I would like to announce the winner of our ZOLL AED3 and Mobilize Rescue Compact Kit. So congratulations to Jessica Barr, and the ZOLL and School Health teams will be in touch with you shortly. I do have a couple of questions for you, Matt. And you talked a lot about how, people are kind of afraid to, or maybe afraid to use an AED if they have never used one before. And maybe that might prevent them from taking an action, should they need to. We have a lot of athletic trainers and school nurses on the call. How can they kind of spread the awareness of an AED is actually fairly easy to use because it does kind of prompt you, or it can prompt you rather?
Well, AEDs are very easy to use because the minute you hit that button, it starts to tell you exactly what to do. And, when I'm talking to the average person, not a medical professional that understands AEDs, but when I'm talking to an average person and I get this, I say, well, how many people here, raise your hands. How many people know people that have an internal defibrillator? It's the exact same thing. You're just putting it externally on a person, but it's very similar to people that have internal defibrillators. They don't just walk around and get shocked, right? They don't go off unless it's needed. I go back to a story that my dad told me. They had, anytime an athlete, for the University of Cincinnati, if an athlete is in certain types of distress, it doesn't necessarily even have to be cardiac related, but they automatically, if there's certain things going on, they put an AED on them on the field and walk them into the facility wearing an AED just in case they go into cardiac arrest for heat related or other situations. As I've met other athletic trainers, they tell me, I've heard the same story over and over again. You could put this on if you have no idea that it's going to happen, and this person can walk around. You just leave it on, and they walk around carrying it until, and if they go into cardiac arrest, it's going to be reading that rhythm and shock them back into normal rhythm. They're not scary. They are life-saving devices for a reason.
I have a question here where a school is kind of concerned about the risk of vandalism or theft if an AED is kind of kept outside. Do you have any advice maybe on how, in a school situation especially, they could kind of mitigate that risk, or any thoughts about that?
I can't, again, a lot of the schools that we work with that have those, it's amazing when they put them out there, no one messes with them. I'm not saying that we've never heard of vandalism issues, because it has happened. Usually it's kids screwing around with it and they throw it in the woods. But an AED serves no purpose, right? It has no street value for people to take, and they can't trade it for money or anything, because they're only good for saving someone's life and being put on a building. So, there's also boxes and trackers and a lot of other equipment on the market today that you can easily put that onto your box or AED, and it will tell you when it gets pulled out and where it is. I mean, there's a lot of easy solutions to this that if you don't have them outside, your risks are higher of having an incident like ours than not, because behind a locked door doesn't work very well.
Gotcha. You talked a lot about the EAP, the emergency preparedness plans, and you showed that sign. Do you have any advice for, maybe besides that, like a sign like that, for other ways that schools can kind of communicate those plans to their parents and the community, so everybody's kind of aware of what to do?
I think the biggest thing is send out an email at the start of every school season, and then every coach, in my mind, should share it with the parents for that team. We work with a soccer organization now, King's Hammer, who actually Matthew played for, here in Greater Cincinnati. And we just started working on a project. And again, let's go back to, this is youth sports. It's the Wild Wild West. They're doing this because they feel it's the right thing to do. But on their Playmetrics app, on every parent's phone and coach's phone, they now have the emergency action plan for every venue tied in Playmetrics. And they send an email out to everyone so that even the parents know at that specific field, they can pull the emergency action plan up right away, know where the AED is, and know what the plan is during an emergency. Again, you have to be proactive as an organization and get buy-in from everybody by sharing these things, right? I mean, we've talked to other schools that won't even show emergency action plans unless you're on the staff, which kind of blows my mind, because even for the visiting team, at the collegiate level, the emergency action plans are shared with the visiting team before they show up. That needs to go all the way down to the youth level, through high school to youth.
Is there kind of a ballpark, maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, of maybe how many AEDs a facility should have in an ideal, situation?
A lot of the organizations that I work with, one was a baseball organization that reached out and said, hey, we have X amount of dollars and we want to buy one AED, and we're going to put it on the golf cart, and we're going to, that way we can take it wherever we need to. I said, I said, how many fields? 7. That's not good enough. I said, what you needed to do is go to the furthest points that you could use this AED on your facility. And you need to go to the point within a minute to find out where the AEDs need to be, right? 3 minutes isn't 3 minutes to the AED and back. It's a minute there, a minute back, a minute to put it on. So that's how you kind of determine where you need your AEDs. You just need to run the drills to see if you can get the AED fast enough. I'll go back to Larry Hergis at Taylor High School. When he was there, he used to walk in. He was the athletic director. He would walk into practice randomly, and he would walk up and tap a kid and tell them to go down on the floor, and they had to simulate their emergency action plan at random when he would walk in. And if they didn't do everything they needed to do within that first 3 minutes, they failed, and they were going to get another surprise. Again, Larry was super passionate about this, And in his time as an athletic director at 2 different schools, they've had 2 saves in the last almost 6 years.
I think we have time for one more. Do you have any advice on how maybe school nurses or athletic trainers can kind of start talking with their district on getting their staff kind of CPR trained, AED trained? How can they start those conversations?
Like I said before, I've heard cost is an issue. Most state laws mandate a certain number of teachers. There's a few states that mandate every teacher is CPR certified, but only a few states. I know Kentucky and Ohio, I think it's like 10% of teachers have to be trained. And to me, that's still crazy, right? Like if you're a teacher in a classroom, and I remember reading an article one time, and the article stated the teacher sent a student to go get the heart team and bring it back. And I'm thinking, what did you do in the minute or two in that in between period? Why are we not down there just doing CPR? That blows my mind, right? Again, we don't need to be certified, but I still feel like every teacher should practice hands-only CPR, and every coach, I mean, should be CPR certified, but still practice CPR because, again, CPR certification is great. Who got good at their job doing it once every 2 years? As medical professionals, we practice it, multiple times to do that, to get recertification and practice. Coaches need to do the same thing, because if they're alone and you're not there as a nurse or an athletic trainer, they need to be prepared, and they also need to be told that they are the medical professional when you're gone for basic life-saving emergency situations until you or EMS can get there. And they all need to be aware of that.
One more question. Is there like an appropriate age range to start teaching CPR or start teaching AED usage? Like if you're going to train a group of students or something like that.
We typically focus on middle school and above because middle school takes it a little bit more seriously. But it's middle school and above that we do the full Take 10 training. But we've done children as young as 6 years old, right? If parents, we've done like where we've invited anybody to come, and parents bring their younger school age children. They might not understand it all, and they might not be able to do full compressions, but it's amazing how you tell them and they get the technique right on the first try. It is amazing. I'm not going to lie, middle school and high school students are way easier to teach than adults.
Gotcha. That's about all the time that we have, Matt. Thank you for sharing this valuable information and for your time and for sharing your story today. And also to everyone who joined us, thank you for joining ZOLL School Health. Have a great rest of your day.